Yes, I think we are online right now. So good afternoon to you all.
Okay.
And good morning to Monique and Victoria. They're in the different time zone. Welcome to another Sciencebased seminars. Due to an accent gap, I would like to inform that I'll be glad to repeat anything if it turns out to be necessary. So to start our seminar today, we're going to start with the good news. So does anyone have a good news can share with us right now?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. But then the good news is that the complete team is engaged in this massive extension activity. That is the project that was approved by the direction of the university called One Planet, One Health, One Welfare. Then for people that are watching us, we'll be receiving one of these massive trucks, 15 meters long, 2.46 meters wide, and this truck is a school on health, and then we partner with the vet school, with the animal science school, and with the agriculture school, together with the city council. And this truck is going to be in the central area here in Pirassununga, and together with 6 stands showing different aspects related to sustainability and health outcomes. And then I'm really grateful for the whole team. And together with the truck came some funds that we ended up hiring several undergrads that are going to be with us. And the time is, the period is from the 11th to the 16th of December. And we have a kickoff seminar on the 10th in the evening. And this is really huge news. That is something never ever done before. Massive. And not only the exhibit to the population, but we have also a well-organized activity with the school system, involving parents and kids, with schools from the whole town of Pirassununga coming every day to go through a well-organized set of activities involving areas in sustainable development. Then be ready and be prepared. It's going to be a real new page on our work. This is the big news. And also the fact that our collaborators from the animal welfare group, from the other guys that are going to be here. People then from Piracicaba, Exalc, FZE, Pirassununga, and FMVZ in São Paulo, all together in this week-long extension initiative. This is my real top news for the week. And the other is that today is my last day on the undergraduate class, and last week we finished this postgrad class on welfare.
So I think that I also have great news. Today is our last seminar of this year, our public seminar. We are going to have another one only for people in the group to share our results. So I would like to thank you, everybody who worked with us in the seminars, all the presenters and all the people who joined us in this precious time. Anybody else has another great news to share? No? Okay, so continuing, today we have the seminar entitled Euthanasia in Farm Animals, Challenges and Solutions. And we have Dr. Paris Garcia. She's an associate professor in global production animal welfare at North Carolina State University College of Veterinary Medicine. She received her DVM at Low Iowa State University in 2011 and completed her PhD in animal physiology in the Department of Animal Sciences in 2014. She is board certified in the American College of Animal Welfare, and her research interests into pain management in livestock animals, timely euthanasia, and on-farm assessments and audits. And we also have, and she's going to speak today, mainly about euthanasia in pigs. And we also have Victoria Merenda, Victoria actually, because she's Brazilian. And she is a second-year PhD student at North Carolina State University College of Veterinary Medicine in Dr. Paris Garcia's lab. She received her DVM at UNES Botucatu in 2016 and completed her Master in Large Animal Clinical Sciences at University of Florida in 2020. Her research focuses on timely euthanasia in dairy cattle. So initially, I would like to ask you to keep your microphones and cameras off during the presentation. And at the end, we open a space for questions. You also can leave your questions in the YouTube or Meet chat. And later on, we are going to release a link for issuing certificates in the chat. Thank you very much to be here today. And Monique and Victoria, now you have 45 minutes to your seminar. Thank you very much to be here as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you for the introduction. We're both very excited to be able to talk to the group and even more excited about the opportunity to be able to come down and see you all in person and continue to collaborate. And so today we're going to be talking about really the work that we've been doing in the last 5 years on swine and cattle euthanasia, and really going to give you just a brief overview on euthanasia, why it's important, particularly in the U.S., and then really start talking about the decision-making process and some of the challenges that we see on farm. I'll pass it over to Victoria, who will then actually be able to highlight our euthanasia education and training programs, and then hopefully we have some time for some questions. So let me know too if anybody can't hear me or if the slides aren't coming up. I'm happy to stop.
Monique, right now I cannot see your slides at all.
You cannot see my slides.
No.
Let me see.
If you try to move forward, I'm going to let you know. But...
Okay, so let's try this.
Which is weird because it was showing before and then it was just like a colorful screen showing there.
Okay, so now can you guys see that?
Yes, much better.
Okay, here we go. Perfect. So just a little bit about myself. So I'm originally from California. So I'm like the exact farthest away location you could be in the United States from where I'm from. I am well known of making beautiful boys. That's my real goal in life, is just to have a bunch of boys that surround me, even though I come from a family of all girls. But this is my family. Danilo is my most Brazilian named boy, and he's 8 months old. And Victor is 5 years old, and Lorenzo is 8. So we really enjoy being in North Carolina. But before this, I received all of my education from Iowa State. And I am a diplomat in the American College of Animal Welfare, which is a relatively new program that certifies veterinarians to be board certified in animal welfare issues. The one huge thing that we have an advantage for in the United States is we have an organization called National Pork Board, and it's an organization that works for producers, and swine producers actually pay into it with what we call checkoff dollars. So every single pig that gets slaughtered in the U.S., a percentage of that profit will go to the National Pork Board. And all of our research has been funded through this organization on swine euthanasia. So it's just something I want to acknowledge relatively quick, and just and kind of one of the reasons why we're seeing so much change in euthanasia research and training because of organizations like this. So kind of as a very brief start overview, you know, euthanasia is not one of those conversations that's very easy to have, even in the veterinary community or on farm community. I think euthanasia tends to be something that in general we don't discuss enough about. It's kind of a taboo topic where people feel uncomfortable about if they have to euthanize or if they're responsible for euthanasia. And sometimes because of that, euthanasia decisions can be really difficult to make because we don't necessarily feel confident in the decisions that we're making, or we don't feel confident in taking on that role. And all of this kind of from a social emotional standpoint can influence how euthanasia is performed on farm and if it's performed in an appropriate way. So our area in our lab is really trying to support producers and veterinarians in livestock medicine to make appropriate decisions on euthanasia, so to make those timely decisions so we don't have animals that are suffering, and then to be able to ensure that when we do euthanize an animal, we're doing it effectively and efficiently. So it's consistent, it's reliable, and we're not causing more suffering to that animal. So what do we mean by euthanasia? I'm sure most of you have had this background before, but euthanasia is derived from the Greek terms eu and thanatos, so meaning good death. So euthanasia is really a tool used by veterinarians to end the life of an animal who's experiencing pain and suffering. And for most of us on livestock, we can recognize that there are going to be many situations where compromised animals are going to not have a high likelihood of recovery, and the best and most ethical thing we can do for that animal is to euthanize it to eliminate that pain. In the United States, euthanasia has become a very hot topic, and primarily for the standpoint that it is safeguarding the welfare of the animal. So we know euthanizing an animal before it experiences extreme suffering and pain is going to be the best thing that we can do from the welfare. We also recognize that it is our responsibility, if we're raising animals, to be able to ensure that if those animals are compromised, if they're suffering, that we have the tools to be able to eliminate that. So from a welfare standpoint, euthanasia is almost always one of my top priorities that I focus on in research, and a top priority that I focus on when I go onto farms and talk with producers. We have also seen a lot of influence from the industry in regards to euthanasia. So in our industry standards, we have national guidelines and standards that pork producers have to follow through, both on an assessment and an audit standpoint. We have a Pork Quality Assurance Plus program that nearly 98% of all producers in the United States are a part of. This is a voluntary program that is more of an assessment and continual improvement, an educational program to ensure good welfare. We also have guidelines and standards specific to euthanasia from our veterinarians, so from the American Association of Swine Vets. And more recently, in the last 5 years, we've seen requirements in terms of euthanasia for our auditing program. So in the US, we have the Common Swine Industry Audit, which is a verification program that any producer that's going to sell pigs to a large packing plant or a large abattoir is required to do. So that humane euthanasia is extremely important to the industry, and it's one of our areas that we consider to be a critical welfare criteria that can actually result in the failure of a farm on an audit or an assessment if euthanasia is a problem. And I think the reason why we see so much emphasis on this is that the industry reputation is very much influenced by what people and the general public see and perceive of the U.S. swine industry. Our public perception, the way that my neighbor or the woman at the grocery store thinks about what a pig farm looks like and how the pigs are treated on the farm, absolutely influences our policies. We are not like the European Union. We have a handful of laws that are required by our producers, but for the most part, anything in regards to standards of operation or the way we manage our animals is going to be by policies of our grocery stores, our retailers. It's very much driven by that market. So if people are concerned about the way pigs are raised, people are not going to want to buy pork, they're not going to want to buy bacon. And so euthanasia or compromised animals that are suffering have a really big influence on that. And we've seen with some of our undercover videos that have come out that have shown animals that require euthanasia, just seeing those images have really damaged the trust that our social kind of network, the trust that the general public feels about what we're doing on farm. So from an industry standpoint, we very much focus on ensuring that animals are euthanized in a timely manner. And so I think we all agree with that. And I think anybody who cares about animals and has the ethical values that living beings shouldn't suffer, I think we all can say, yes, that's the right thing to do. But we still see a lot of challenges with implementing timely euthanasia on farm. We still see problems where we go into a barn and we have animals that needed to be euthanized very clearly, but aren't. And so our lab is really focusing on how do we get producers and caretakers to be confident in making the decisions to euthanize at the right time using the right method. So how do we make them feel comfortable that this is the right decision to make and to be confident every single time when they go in to do this? So just to check, make sure I'm not talking to myself. Are we all good? Victoria, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. All right, so this really kind of comes into the first area that we're interested in, and this is investigating barriers associated with timely euthanasia decision-making on swine farms. And one thing I want to point out is everything we've done with the pigs, we've also done with cattle. I didn't want to have to repeat the information twice, and so we're going to kind of separate them out. But all the information, all of the surveys, focus groups, we've done both for swine producers in the United States as well as for dairy producers. And so this first area was really focusing on understanding why people don't make the right decision when it comes to euthanasia, and really kind of having an idea on who decides what type of conditions an animal needs to be euthanized, and then what are some of those things that are preventing people from making those decisions. So the first thing we started out with was a survey, and we used the Animal Welfare Committee of the National Pork Board. And this survey had 33 participants, and it was really set up as a way for us to understand what animals are being euthanized on farm and why. And so within that survey, we had a section just on demographics. But then what we did, the majority of the survey, it had 26 conditions. So, reasons in an animal being sick or compromised. So whether that was a lameness issue, an animal had a hernia, poor body condition, we gave them 26 conditions that we would expect to see on pig farms. And then we asked these individuals to score what they would do. And so for each condition, the participant had the option to score 1, meaning they would euthanize that animal immediately. Score 2, meaning they would treat that animal but euthanize within 12 hours if that animal didn't get better. A score 3 being treat but euthanize within 24 hours if the animal didn't get better. A score 4, meaning treat and euthanize within 48 hours if the animal didn't get better. And then a score 5 was to not treat and reevaluate, or cull. And in the US, cull means you're going to send that pig onto a truck to go to the slaughterhouse. And so that really was kind of the meat of our survey, and we were trying to understand just how consistent we are in each condition on what we would actually do and why we would euthanize. So this is just a visual depiction of the results from that survey, and it shows that cumulative distribution of euthanasia scores for these specific clinical conditions. So just to kind of orient you, the red is that score 1, where the individual said they would euthanize immediately. The yellow is they would euthanize within 12 hours, green euthanize within 24 hours, and then purple euthanize within 48 hours, and that blue not euthanize. And so I think from a visual standpoint, what's really interesting is there's still a lot of variation. You have a situation or a condition like a hernia, and you have this animal welfare committee who is very much aware of the standards and requirements for euthanasia, kind of deciding all over the place on what they would do, right? So on a hernia, you have about 40+% of people who would euthanize immediately. You have about 10% who are going to wait for that 24 hours. You have another 15% who are going to wait 48 hours. And then you have a large chunk, probably 25%, who are not going to euthanize at all. And so the results from this study really emphasize that we do not have a consistent way of deciding what animals need to be euthanized and what animals don't. And even if you have people who are very well educated, who are trained in euthanasia, it's kind of all over the place in terms of treatment, treating an animal or euthanizing an animal. And this is kind of just a different way of looking at the data instead of that visual. And so we broke down these conditions into broader categories. So integument, so any skin issue, any reproductive issue, any respiratory issue, GI issue, all of those, more than 50% of the participants said that they were going to treat those animals. And so we kind of are starting to see a little bit of categories on what's considered more severe and not severe. But when you start getting into more serious conditions, so issues related to body condition, neurologic issues, systemic conditions, you know, we're almost split across the board in terms of a quarter of those people are going to euthanize, a quarter of those people are going to treat, a quarter of those people are going to cull. We're really kind of all over the place. And so I think this emphasizes that even though we do have some training material in the US, we really don't have a consistent way to decide when an animal needs to be euthanized or not. And the locomotor one is something of importance to me. So I do a lot of work, or I did a lot of work with lameness in pigs. And by far in the United States, lameness is the #1 issue that we see on sow farms. So when we start talking about sows that need to be treated, or sows that have injured their limbs, or sows that are not able to stand up, by far 90% plus of the time, those are going to be the animals that we start talking about timely euthanasia issues. And so when we look at the locomotion and we actually break it down a little bit more, I mean, the results are pretty scary in the sense that we don't really have consistency across the board on what we're going to do. So for a fractured limb, 90% of those participants would euthanize that animal immediately, but we still have 6.5% and 3.2% of people that would either not euthanize that animal and put them on a truck, or we have 6.5% of people who are going to wait 48 hours when we all know that a fractured limb is not going to heal in 48 hours. There's nothing I can give as a veterinarian to make that animal get any better. But we still have a small population of people who are making decisions that are going to go against the welfare of the animal, are going to go against our fitness for transport, and are making poor decisions related to the outcome for that animal. Another very serious thing here is this non-ambulatory. So non-ambulatory is defined as an animal that cannot bear weight on 2 or more legs. So that animal cannot stand up on its own. We only had 60% of our participants that would euthanize immediately. And this is a pretty shocking number because our standards, our national guidelines require immediate euthanasia for a non-ambulatory animal. And so I think this again kind of emphasizes we have a lot of work to go in terms of ensuring that compromised animals that require immediate euthanasia are being euthanized. And I think lameness, at least in our system, and I know Adraldo's been doing some work on lameness as well, but lameness, at least on U.S. swine farms, is going to be a really critical focus that we need to prioritize. So that kind of gives you the idea on why animals are being euthanized on farm, or more so why they're not being euthanized on farm. And that gives us a good understanding to know what are some of the clinical things that we need to be focusing on as vets, or what are some of the treatments that we need to be focusing on. But, you know, it still doesn't really address the person standpoint of it, or the human component to it. And so we took this a little bit further, and we discussed why we wanted to know why people make the decisions that they do. We know that the data shows that, you know, people are inconsistent in how they're going to euthanize, but why? What is the reason? And so we took the same group of individuals that did the survey, and we conducted 2 focus groups. And so I'm not sure how familiar you are with focus groups, but essentially they're 8 to 10, they're groups of 8 to 10 people, and it's an open dialogue with questions that are going to help facilitate the discussion. And rather than having that very quantitative approach that we're probably very used to, where we get numbers and results, this is very much developing a way for us to understand the conversation behind euthanasia, and for us to be able to have a better perspective on some of those nuances that we wouldn't be able to pick up on with a survey. So for this focus group, we had 6 questions, and we had a variety of questions. But for this particular presentation today, I just want to focus on question 3, which was, what is the biggest factor for why euthanasia would be delayed or not performed on your farm or farms you have visited? So within this focus group, we had swine veterinarians, swine producers, we had allied industry, animal scientists. And so we were really trying to ask the question, why? Why, if when I walk onto a farm to do an audit, is there an animal that needed to be euthanized a couple of days ago that wasn't? What is the reason? And the reason is it's complicated. So if you see this slide, there is a lot of things that are going into what is preventing people in the right decision for the animal. And so this is just kind of a word diagram where we picked up on some bigger themes that we heard consistently throughout the focus groups, and then some of those sub-themes. So these bigger black are considered our themes that influence why a person would make the decision they would do. And then within those, we have these sub-themes. And it's complicated. There's a lot of reasons on why people are not euthanizing. And there's a lot of challenges that go into that, not just the emotional side of things, but also on logistics, access to resources, the size of the farm, the training of the employees, the ability to kind of make that economic justification for losing an animal. So there's a lot that goes into it. Today, I want to talk a little bit about kind of where we are in terms of the emotional side of this. So when we talk about barriers to euthanasia, we have logistical challenges, which makes sense. You know, you don't have euthanasia equipment, you can't euthanize animals. We have competing priorities. Oh, sorry, my slides I think are a little delayed. So logistical challenges are going to be related to, you know, not having the material, not having the euthanasia techniques or tools. So you don't have a captive bolt gun on farm, so you're not going to be able to euthanize. Competing priorities came up as caretakers feeling like they were overwhelmed with the amount of work they had. So if they're supposed to be breeding sows or feeding animals, they don't feel like they have the time to go and euthanize an animal. They're taking care of the animals that are alive. Economics was a big one, right, for both the reasons to euthanize and not to euthanize. So we have a really small pig that's not likely going to get better, even though there's no clinical issue with that pig. Or we have a sow who is about to farrow and we don't want to lose all of her piglets if we euthanize her. And then these are the really interesting ones that we've been focusing on more. So this emotional strain related to euthanasia, and then farm culture and accountability. So I want to talk a little bit about this because I don't think it's something that we spend enough time focusing on. And it's definitely a challenge when we start thinking about asking individuals that are taking care of animals every single day, that are seeing animals grow, putting all of that effort into it, and then asking them at the same time to go and euthanize an animal. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So from the emotional strain standpoint, there was really two sub-themes that came out of this. One was the sense of failure that an individual on farm who's taking care of animals feels like they have disappointed the pig by requiring euthanasia, that they didn't do everything that they were supposed to do, and it's their fault. So they feel this sense of failure. The other aspect of the emotional strain was the desire to save all the pigs. So feeling as if they're going to continue to move on, continue to treat, even if that animal is not responding to treatment because of this issue, because of that sense of failure and that inability to want to actually take the life of an animal. And I think that can really be summed up on a quote that one of the focus group caretakers said. And I think it's coming up on your slide. Perfect. So this was from a producer, and the producer said, "It is your job to keep pigs alive and care for them well. The end of life decision is not one that really flows well with that mentality. So you're asking people to essentially say, I failed." And I think that's really valuable. I think as academics, we tend to get too focused on the objective science of animal welfare, and we need to start thinking about what the people are experiencing. The other area is farm culture and accountability. And this is a very interesting one as well, because it comes down to creating a community that's disciplined in ensuring that euthanasia is going to be conducted appropriately, is creating a culture of animal welfare where everybody buys in and everybody believes that animal welfare should be the priority, and also maintaining that high standard. So this was a quote from an academic vet where he described, or she described, that euthanasia is a highly dispersed decision occurring millions of times a day across our swine farms, and it really needs a community sense of discipline with each other to keep on doing it correctly. And I think that speaks very much in animal welfare issues in general, beyond just euthanasia. If we are going to create a change in how we raise animals and how we care for them, that culture has to change along with the people that are working there. And one thing that I've really seen on swine very pretty amazing is we're starting to see that you have individuals that come on farm that aren't there to take care of the animals, but maybe they're there to look at nutrition or fix facilities. And a lot of companies are changing that approach, that just because you're not there to take care of an animal doesn't mean that you're not responsible for the welfare. So if you have someone in the barn who's fixing a pen and they see an animal welfare issue, they're responsible to report it as well, and they're responsible to find someone to take care of that animal. So it's no longer just the welfare people or the welfare caretakers, it's everybody on farm. I think another really nice quote on this is, the culture of an operation really drives appropriate procedures in handling and interactions with animals, especially at times when oversight isn't always present, which is typically the case. If the culture is set appropriately, then that's where the best decision making can happen. And for our US swine farms, the swine veterinarians usually will come on farm about once a month. Our managers will come on about every 2 weeks, but it's very much on the caretakers and the people working in the barns to do the right things. There's a lot of things that you could do poorly and you probably wouldn't get caught. But I think this particular quote is emphasizing that it really comes down to everybody wanting to do the right thing and making sure that the animal is the priority. So just kind of as a conclusion on that, one thing I want to emphasize is the decision-making process for euthanasia is multifactorial. There's a lot of things that come into play on that. And I've really tried to be appreciative of my producers when we run into a situation where an animal hasn't been euthanized, that there is a lot going on in that person's life. And there's a lot of factors that are going to influence that. And very, very rarely have I experienced a producer who has failed to euthanize because they want the animal to suffer. It is almost always the case that the person is overwhelmed. The person doesn't feel like they have the support system, both emotionally and maybe from a labor standpoint, to do what's right. And I think, I also want to emphasize that farm culture and the way people feel about euthanasia is going to continue to influence that decision. So even if we get captive bolt guns on every single swine farm in Brazil, it's not going to change our euthanasia if we do not have the people feeling comfortable and confident in doing it. And then the last thing I just want to kind of talk about, and this is where Victoria is going to take over, is the educational material and resources on good decision making are needed. And one area that we're focusing on now, and Victoria is going to provide an example on the dairy cattle side, is trying to reduce the number of timely euthanasia failures through training. So we're creating educational material and resources to improve the caretaker's ability to identify the compromised animals, to recognize when euthanasia is warranted, and to be able to perform euthanasia in that timely manner using the appropriate equipment or tools that you have. So with that, Victoria, I will switch your slides for you. Just let me know and I'll put myself on mute.
Sounds good. Well, guys, thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. And I know that's right after lunch in Brazil, so I'll try to make it brief and sweet. And we finally arrived to the fun part. So Monique, if you can press next, that would be good. Because I cannot see the cows thing. Yeah, here we go. So having all of that in mind, everything that Monique said and all these inconsistencies that we found during the surveys and focus groups, we are working on developing and disseminating science-based euthanasia standards that provide defined timelines to help take some of these inconsistencies out of the on-farm euthanasia process and ultimately improve cattle welfare across the dairy industry. Next. And how are we doing that? So we are designing a program based on both the active nature of euthanasia decision-making and a problem-centered approach. And we are also heavily incorporating multimedia as an alternative to traditional classroom learning. Multimedia learning has been demonstrated to improve clinical decision-making and promote greater satisfaction and perceived credibility of the material. Multimedia learning has also been demonstrated to positively influence information retention, and recognizing that the training section is relatively brief and the skills will need to be utilized on farm immediately, such learning efficiencies afforded by this multimedia learning are important consideration for us. Next. So now let's take a look at the overall design of our program. Once we begin taking this training, a video introduces the program and then immediately takes the learner to one of the two production stage selection modules. And an options tab, as you can see here on the left, allows the learner to access different modules. Next. And as I said, we have a brief introduction video. And in this video, we will talk about the definition of euthanasia. And basically, that euthanasia is not a failure. By the time the learner finishes watching this introduction video, he will know how to interact with the multimedia tool, and he will be able to select which production stage he wants to learn more about. Next. And our multimedia is based on case studies. So case studies are generally defined as a story or way of studying a topic that brings up specific points for analysis. Therefore, we opted to use a case study design to transmit information as it takes advantage of the caretaker's past knowledge of cow's health and the desire to be self-directed learners. And here we can see that we have the calf module, which contains 5 case studies, and the cows and heifers module, which contains 9 different case studies. Next. How does it work? Within each case study, both photo and videos are used to ask the learner to identify compromised animals and then to further highlight unique observations and clinical signs of the cow or the calf. And after providing this background information, learners are asked to make management decisions, which most often include variations of 3 basic options: do not intervene, treat, or euthanize. At the completion of the entire production stage, a certificate of completion is provided to the learner as a means to document completion. Next. Wow, it's super delayed, these slides. So now I'd like to take you through some of the specific features of our training program. Each case study has a specific emphasis on individual cow evaluation, which closely parallels caretakers' daily responsibilities. And this contextual similarity improves information retention. In this case here, for instance, I know that the video kind of sucks right now, but in this case here, for instance, the student is asked to highlight on the clipboard anything that may require attention. So in this case specifically, this cow will have metritis, and the student should highlight difficult calving because it's associated with metritis. Next. We also chose to use colloquialisms as opposed to scientific terminology to ensure understanding by caretakers using familiar terms. So to illustrate here, in this example question, we use the term swollen udder as opposed to udder edema. And instead of saying that mastitis is a painful process, we will mention that the cow kicked after having her udder touched. And our main goal here is to apply the scientific knowledge to what the caretakers would see on a farm. Next. Because so much of what defines timely is based on how long the individual cow or calf has been treated, as Monique just mentioned, the program makes clear references to the day and time that any event occurred. Monique, I think you're unmuted. And this allows the caretaker to carefully follow along with the animal's recovery. So in this case here, for example, we had this cow with dystocia and a large calf on a Wednesday morning. On Wednesday afternoon, she was not rising by herself anymore, and she became non-ambulatory, but she was still alert and responsive. On the following day in the morning, she's not eating or responsive anymore, And on Friday, because she was lying down and she was poorly milked, she also developed mastitis. Next. Similarly, we provide past timelines to recreate the situation in which a caretaker initially notes an injury and a different caretaker follows up with the cow on a different day. So in this case study, for example, the narrator will describe that you left the cow there at the farm on Tuesday 13th, but your colleague forgot to treat her when it was his day off. When you come back to the farm on Thursday and you have to figure out what is the best management for the cow. We are also aware that the vast majority of our learners are adults, and we are trying our best to maintain the caretaker's engagement. So we also incorporated some additional questions, which were not only related to selecting sick cows. And these questions were also included there to further develop their observational skills. So as one of our supplemental materials, we created Teeter, which is a little bit different than Tinder. And in this Teeter version, the learner will select which cow should be euthanized on farm or which cow could be transported to a slaughterhouse. So here we have a small description of the history of the animal, and based on the picture or video, the learner should click on transport or do not transport. Next. In our program, we also talk about acceptable techniques to use to euthanize calves and cows, but we also try to teach the learner some useful knowledge that he or she may apply on farm, such as how to score cows for their body condition. And one of the most interesting features of our case study designs is that they allow learners engagement, as I already mentioned. And this engagement enables caretakers to take an active role in the learning process and to gain practical skills that they can begin using immediately. So here in this case study, for example, caretakers must select which animal requires more attention based on their eyes. The immediate incorrect or correct response reinforces the correctness of their decision. So in addition, feedbacks provided after each management choice, as it explains the appropriateness of the learner's decision using Valida's guidelines as the conceptual basis. The program is not prescriptive with regards to treatment recommendations because we want to avoid suggesting treatments which may not be supported by the farm's veterinarian or SOPs. Next. When we talk about flexible responses, we also recognize that farms exercise liberty in making euthanasia decisions for their cows, especially because the euthanasia guidelines are not really clear. So having that in mind, the feedback in each response provides positive reinforcement that multiple appropriate options exist. So here, for instance, we have this cow with this huge mess in her eye. And the narrator already told her history, mentioning her poor body condition score, and that she's blind in one of the eyes. So then our question is, what would you like to do with this cow? And both answers involving treating her and euthanizing her are correct. If you choose to euthanize her, it would tell the learner about the possible infection in the eye, the poor BCS of 2.25, and that she's blind. Whereas the option to treat in the lower right would also show as correct, but it would reinforce that euthanasia should also be considered. Next. So just another example here of flexible responses, but now including a calf's case study with various decision choices provided. In this specific case, we had 2 calves that were previously selected because they were likely suffering from respiratory distress. And the question is, what would you like to do next? And 2 options related to management changes are provided. One is to treat only the calf that was struggling to breathe and monitor the other calves with eye and nasal discharge. And the second option is to treat all the calves. Again, both of the responses are correct. Next. In order to teach the learners about the disease of each case, we have one part of each case that will briefly cover the disease and the main clinical symptoms that they would observe on farm. So here, for instance, we had a case study with a cow that had calving paralysis. And we can learn more about the history of the animals that are more prone to have this disorder and what is the typical posture that they would see on farm. This multimedia tool also allows the learner to zoom in the picture if he wants to. Next. When we talk about certificates, we are also aware that documentation of training is important for audits as well as other venues. Therefore, a completion checklist is provided as supplementary material for use by farms. And we'll provide one certificate for the cow's production stage and another one for the calves part. Next. Looking to the future, we are also aware that most of the laborers here in the United States are foreign-born and they speak mainly Spanish. Therefore, we are going to translate all this material that I just showed here to Spanish. And we plan to distribute both materials in English and Spanish in a flash drive without the use of internet to farmers and national organizations and co-ops. Next. And with that, I would like to thank you for the invitation to present here our material. And we would be glad to take any questions you guys may have. And I hope you guys didn't fall asleep as well.
Yeah, really nice. And I think not many of us think about the whole emotional component of this euthanasia. That's a really novel approach to that. But how many people are in the animal welfare committee from the National Pork Board, Monique?
Yeah, so there was about
And
30.
who are they? Who are they also, just for us to get an idea?
Yep, so there was 33 individuals that participated, and the National Pork Board's committees are supposed to be diverse across the industry. So you'd have swine veterinarians, you would have animal scientists in academia, producers, caretakers, as well as allied industries, so individuals part of pharmaceutical companies.
Very nice. And these are people, this committee is renewed on a regular basis or?
Yeah, so it used to be a 3-year committee commitment. And so every single 3 years, they would bring on more people. Unfortunately, National Pork Board has taken a little bit different approach in the last 2 years. So they do not have the committee anymore. What they have is task force for specific issues. So they have a depopulation task force, and then they have an audit task force.
Thank you. And I also found fascinating your approach with Victoria on the training. It's really, I'm sure you have a lot of things to talk in the future. Very well done. Brilliant, brilliant.
Any other questions? As people have time to think about their own questions, I have a question myself. So I would like to know if there is like about the methods to euthanizing, and if there is some kind of a bias, I mean, some method that people would prefer better, or people for some religion, or maybe people for some sex, or I don't know.
So for the swine industry, a very common method that has been used consistently with piglets is blunt force trauma. So you're physically disrupting the brain by either swinging the pig to the ground or bringing an object to the pig. From a scientific and welfare standpoint, it's an extremely effective euthanasia method. So the animal is rendered unconscious and dies almost immediately. But people feel really uncomfortable seeing that, and a lot of caretakers feel really comfortable doing that. So in the US, we have gone away from that, and now we do more like CO2, where the piglet goes into a box, and then the caretaker doesn't have to directly do it, or like a non-penetrating captive bolt gun. So caretaker perceptions on euthanasia are big, and what I always recommend, if you have the to be able to have multiple ways to euthanize, then the person doing it can choose what they feel more comfortable doing. In the US too, we have firearms. I know you guys you're not cowboys like us. You don't get to use guns all the time, but safety issues are big with that. So anytime you have a gun on farm, that gun can be used not just for pigs, it can be used for people too. So there's a lot of safety concerns, and a lot of people don't feel comfortable being in a farm where there is a gun.
Yeah, but for cows, we mainly use firearms here. In Brazil, I'm not sure what we use, but here in the United States, we use firearms for cows.
I'm not sure as well what we use in Brazil. Professor Adroaldo, do you know a little bit about it?
There's been in piglets, there is a recent work carried out by a gentleman called Felipe Dalla Costa. And in Brazil, there's a new IN 113. Yeah, blunt trauma is still used, but bears the same type of problems. And there's a huge push by the industry now to move ahead with new technology. And some of the larger pig facilities are now using these captive bolt pistol, Monique and Victoria, although they're not easily available. And in the past, there's some discussion whether or not they're firearms, and the regulations of firearms quite tough in Brazil. Then I would say in the industry, the best work done now is by this gentleman called Felipe Dalla Costa. He mapped that in the pig industry, and it's still blunt trauma for piglets is the most used. And on large sows, I mean, it's kind of people still have this kind of improvised electric system with no control. I mean, where they basically plug in the mains. But there's when you're coming here, and we're certainly going to put you in touch with people that are doing a lot of effort, because the main pig producers are feeling the demand also, not only for the employees but also for the public image, because it's something really tough. Then, just summarizing your question, for piglets, still blunt trauma is probably the most used, and there are a few experiment with the electric type of system, and some not many people using captive bolt pistols.
Thank you, Professor Adroaldo, to give us an overview about the
Thiago, is Thiago there? Is Thiago there? Thiago may have even more updated information. Are you there, Thiago? I think Thiago getting the talk, probably left.
Here, but I think he left a little minutes before. Maybe he was busy. I don't know. But he was here.
But again, there's a massive. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work by this gentleman, Felipe Dalla Costa. He worked with a Navy.
We actually met him like 2 weeks ago or something. So
brilliant. Yeah, he's done a phenomenal film. And in fact, our group here at the University of São Paulo is a kind of a massive idea generating hub, and he was here before starting his PhD. And this issue of euthanasia, I think, is so central, and it's so poorly done, even in academic institutions around Brazil. And we need to get our home, I think, organized. Even if you go to academic institutions in Brazil, you do see a tremendous amount of variability in how people make these choices. And I don't know. You've talked about that. The whole religions. Brazil is a very Catholic country, and this whole set of religions. I mean, whether or not you do, of course, when you kill an animal and you eat, I mean, apparently you are forgiven for doing that. But if you kill just for kill, there's something so awful about that. That is, and I'm not the one saying that. I mean, there's a lot of research saying that, and that kind of line we need to find a way of crossing where people don't feel guilty about doing that.
I'll try to find a Bible verse or something that can help us.
I think it would be useful. We need to get some type of Catholic evangelic. That's absolutely
a letter from the Pope. Maybe we can.
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely, because we had one of our, sorry for taking more time than Gustavo gave me. One of our students in our team was incredibly interested. And in fact, I mean, there was a time when the decision to euthanize the pig was delayed at the farm, at the pig farm. And these students stayed the whole weekend sleeping in the office, looking after this. Then, of course, it was a Sunday. I went there and I took the decision, and I euthanized this animal because the animal would not recover. And then we had a seminar series on euthanasia. And the reality is that, I mean, when you got people to talk, I mean, of course, people immediately cross the boundary between the decision with animals and the potential decision with humans and which human. And then that is that kind of situation, Monique and Victoria, is that we need to have a very clear message of what is exactly the meaning. I mean, and then people build massive layers of complexity on an issue that find out the animal is there and is experiencing unbearable suffering. But the religious part, I mean, I'm sure in Brazil you'd find that to be quite important. And what Felipe did was the first time he mapped how bad people truly felt when they euthanize an animal. He kind of asked people. And people told him, I mean, well, I felt bad for a week or 2 weeks or something like that. Sorry, Gustavo, is back to you, Gustavo. Sorry for me taking more time than you gave.
Thank you for your comment, Professor. It was really nice. And we have a lot of comments. Thank you. You both for the seminar. And we also have a comment of Laia Kanan. She works with Professor Cesar and also with Monique in a partnership. And she said, in Brazil, we have a booklet called Euthanasia of Pigs on Farm. Oh, sorry, thank you, Tawana. In Brazil, we have a booklet called Euthanasia of Pigs on Farms, organized by the MAPA, Ministry of Agriculture, which details the best methods of euthanizing each category of swine in the field. So thank you, Laia, for the contribution. And anybody else has any other comment or question? If not, I would like to...
Probably Laia can help us to understand what are the methods more used in Brazil, because she's quite current in the literature review. I'm not sure if she has anything to tell us about the current, any new data on what is exactly used in pig farms in Brazil.
She's on YouTube, so Laia, if you have something to say.
You can write down.
Yes, you can write down. That's a problem because on YouTube we are a little bit delayed, so she's going to get this message a little minutes after. Oh, she answered. She said, for piglets, the most used method is concussion. Maybe you have a better accent to say concussion. And she said with a hammer.
Yeah, we use this for cats too, although it's not legal, so we also use hammers for cows, but not good.
Yeah, maybe you have to develop a bit those methods. So if you don't have any other questions, I would like to congratulate you all very much, and thank you all very much, Monique and Victoria, to be here with us today and to give this presentation to us. It was really insightful. And we also like to thank you very much, everybody who was here with us today, Laia and other people who were also here and helped us to share our seminars. And right now, I would like to share my screen. So we're going to just give the news about the next seminar. Are you all seeing my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Thank you very much. And I've read your name several times and I never knew that you're Brazilian, Victoria. Now you're in trouble. Now you're in trouble. That you know that you're
Sou
Brazilian.
brasileira também.
Legal, legal.
Brasilzão velho de guerra.
Can you see my screen right now?
Yeah.
Great. Foi? So
should invite people for our brilliant.
Yes, so our next seminar is going to be next year on March, and it's going. Yeah, our first presenter is going to be Professor Adroaldo. So we all invited you to be with us today next year. And again, we thank you very much to be here with us today. See you next time, and bye-bye.
Everybody that got engaged in this organization of the seminars, and